Hello everyone, female Frodo Baggins here. Since the dawn of man, Hollywood executives had understood one thing. Hot people sell movies. Until today, it would seem. Now, this is a topic that might get me in a lot of trouble for even bringing up because of all of the connotations of daring to speak on if someone is attractive enough. Who am I to even do that as just a little potato here talking on YouTube? And then that makes other people insecure when you're making comparisons here. But let's dive right into it. Let's dive right into this topic that had been on my mind a little bit after the big July movie season, because I believe that Hollywood has gotten way off track in terms of not just the movies they make, but how they market their movies. Because it's one thing to have a ton of bad movies these days made by people who do not care about movies in general, who are just trying to make second screen content for streaming. Yes, that's one thing, but logic of the plot is not what sells a movie. You sell a movie based on other superficial aspects. And I think that a lot of those superficial aspects that they used to sell movies on, once again, have disappeared and not for the better. And I'm obviously using generalizations here. I'm not saying that there are no hot people left in movies anymore. But let me just hear me out. Let me explain what I mean here. As I was saying, Hollywood, long time, decades past, always understood that how to market movies, you need to appeal to people's basic instincts. What are people's basic instincts? Sex and violence. Now, this is actually something that people used to disparage Hollywood for. Like, there was an old saying back in the old days of Hollywood that all movies amounted to was kiss, kiss, bang, bang, which once again is just saying that they would just amount to sex and violence. But guess what? The movies, they actually sold with that because the studio executives understood that that is what people wanted. And when we talk about these old movies, mind you, we're talking about Hays Code movies. We're talking about movies that could not be violently or sexually explicit. Yet, back in the day, if you watch the Hays Code movies, they have so much more sex appeal than movies of today do. Just see Rita Hayworth in Gilda, or anything with Marilyn Monroe, though I recognize that she was very controversial at the time. But the film noir films, there's a lot of parodies about them, but they usually involved maybe a man getting involved with a super hot woman with some shady dealings. Like, these were Hays Code's films. The films that were under heavy scrutiny from religious organizations and conservative organizations for what kind of content would appear in films. But why there are so many good Hays Code films is because you had people with a lot of creativity back then. So where there were a lot of restrictions on these sorts of things, filmmakers would still find ways to make things as steamy as possible. And honestly, that actually made a lot of these old movies and old couples very attractive because there was a certain restriction on how explicit they could be. They couldn't go too far with it, but that made them more creative with the dialogue and how things would be portrayed and the tension that they would have to portray between these couples, which made for a lot of steaminess, if you know what I mean. But there were a lot of classy, attractive actors and actresses in these old movies. Gregory Peck, and the movies sold that way. And throughout the decades, there have been different iterations of that, some becoming more trashy than others, like in the early 2000s. I am obviously not a person who says that there aren't ways that you can't go too far with this, and why I actually would commend the Hays Code, not for the Hays Code entirely, but just how the period of restriction showed how filmmakers could be creative with this, and how it actually, I think, even made the romantic chemistry between characters better. But then we have the modern day, and this is the one time in film history. Please, guys, look at the pre-code films. This is the one time in film history where there's no attempt to make sure that you have hot actors and actresses looking that way on the screen, and there's scarcely an attempt at steamy romantic chemistry is what I'm talking about. Now, I am not saying with this that we don't have plenty of attractive actors and actresses. In fact, quite the opposite. Hollywood is still filled by incredibly attractive people that you see on the red carpet in these extraordinary outfits and on magazines and these photo shoots, and they are more attractive than the average person could ever dream of being. My problem is then they get into the films and they do not look like that. Let me give an example. Superman. Superman has some very attractive people cast for that movie. David Corenswet, Rachel Brosnahan. You see them on the red carpet events and in promotionals, and they are incredibly attractive people. And Rachel Brosnahan and David Corenswet had something that I haven't seen in a mainstream movie in forever, and that is actually steamy romantic chemistry for at least the 2 scenes that we got for them. So that is all good. But when I look at Rachel Brosnahan and David Corenswet on the magazine shoots and the photo calls and the red carpets, and then I look at them in the movie, I'm just like, what happened? Because this is not a knock against them as people. They are incredibly attractive people. It's more of a knock against how they are presented in the films, how they are dressed. Because for whatever reason, it seems like it's okay to make people look their best when it comes to magazines and red carpets and all of that. But then I will see people in the movies themselves, and it's like they didn't even try. Like, we're using Superman as an example, Isabella Merced, one incredibly attractive actress, but she looks incredible on all of these red carpet events and all of that once again. But then in the movie, they put her in CW leather, and in fact, everyone is in CW leather. David Corenswet really worked out and bulked up for his Superman role, but he looks bulkier in his Daily Planet clothes than he does in his actual Superman outfit. It's like the Superman outfit is overly textured and the colors are muted in a way so that it actually made him look smaller for some reason. And then there's Lois, who is Rachel Brosnahan of all people, and as Lois Lane, she is given like thrift store looking clothes to wear. And once again, this is not a knock on any of the very, very attractive actors and actresses here as we see them regularly. It's more of a knock on the costuming and presentation of Superman, that it really does not take advantage of the fact that you have very attractive people cast in these roles. That's what I'm getting at. I don't know why you would cast very attractive people in these roles, as you should, and then make them look plainer in the actual film. I don't know why you would do that. And now, is it a James Gunn thing? I don't think so. And what I'm getting at in this video once again is that it used to be understood. What's an easy way to sell a film? Attractive people. That's what Hollywood was. And some people get upset with that because, yes, Hollywood has had a problem in the past where it pressures people so much. That's how people get into the trap of feeling like they need to get surgery because the standards are too high. I don't believe in very high standards. I just see how these people are on the red carpet when they're dressed nice with a nice makeup job and all that, and I compare them to when they're wearing the CW leather-clad outfits in the movie, and I'm like, you guys could have tried harder. But another movie this year that we saw like that again was Fantastic Four, which bombed at the box office for a Marvel movie. It made more than the average movie, but Marvel movie budgets are still way too high. But guys, here's the thing. People don't like to hear this. And that's, I think, why we can't get any of this by, even though it would be a basic marketing tactic to even try to get these movies sold. Basic marketing tactic, at least, have one heartthrob on the Fantastic Four. Johnny Storm was supposed to be that character. Or I compared this to Marvel Rivals and how Marvel Rivals really excited people over the Fantastic Four just because the designs of all of the characters were very, very attractive and appealing to people. And that is what got people excited. I think the most hype that I've seen over Marvel Rivals in new characters. But that is not what they did for Fantastic Four. They got actors who were each 10 to 15 years too old for their roles, and none of them was a heartthrob, and all of their outfits were frumpy sweaters. Now, someone argued to me that is the point, that this is a movie set in the 60s or a fictional 60s other world, and that it's supposed to mimic the clean-cut heroes that you would have back then, maybe on TV. First of all, as we go through the Hays Code and other things during those eras, it wouldn't all be clean-cut back then. However, I will say that maybe in this day and age, that was not the best way to go for a direction for a movie. Now, they desperately tried to make Pedro Pascal that heartthrob, but as I've talked about before, that did not work. Pedro, he looks like a man in his 50s. They really, really tried hard to push him into like this Brad Pitt-esque role that nobody ever really considered him a part of before, and that I don't think he was even necessarily comfortable with being. They just really tried to push him in this role, calling him a daddy and trying to make him out to be this big heartthrob that all the women are just going after, but it just doesn't work because we've never decided that that's how we feel about him before, and that's not really what he is. So they really tried to force it with him, but it did not work whatsoever. But I think if you had somebody who could fit in that kind of role for Mr. Fantastic, then it would have worked. You just can't force it. But that's another one of the reasons why I think that there was just nothing eye-catching about the Fantastic Four movie. That's the first thing you have to do when you're marketing the movies, and that's why they relied on attractive people so much. It's like, we need to catch people's eyes first, and that's how we get them to see what the rest of the movie is like. So that's why I think that costuming and hiring the right actors was very important for Fantastic Four. But they hired, in all honesty, bland-looking outfits, bland-looking actors for the Fantastic Four movie. No one's heads was going to be turned. And as I'm saying that, people are going to get really upset with me for saying that. But I think that is the problem once again, is that we don't want to say anything about how people are dressed or who might be the most fitting for a role, who might be the most attractive and appealing person for a role. We don't want to say that because that offends people. So we just go on and pretend that movies are going to be sold based on people looking very plain and normal. And, Hollywood executives, they can be very abusive in the past and very shrewd, but you need a certain level. You need a certain level of not abusiveness, but a certain level of shrewdness when marketing your movies for what people want and what is going to get people to look in the first place. But now it seems that we're content with everything being plain. Now, I talked about how Pedro Pascal was not the guy that they were promoting him as, and it just did not work with people. And I want to tie that back into what is actually the entire point of this video is Hollywood does not give people what they want. They used to cater to people's basic instincts all the time, but they don't do that anymore. They're trying to fight against it. And the example I'm going to use here of that is Henry Cavill, because Henry Cavill was marketing himself as that guy at one point, and it was working. Henry Cavill, after the Superman fiasco, was really on the downturn for him. He was really trying to market himself with a lot of sex appeal, and it was actually working. And more than that, Henry Cavill just seemed very attractive as a person and behind the scenes. How he would talk about things, how he would talk about respecting fans and the lore.
When it comes to fans, it is a fan's right to have whatever opinion they want to have, and people are going to be upset because, especially when you're talking about books or games, because you're never going to be the exact person who they had in their head or who they played on Witcher 3, for example. I don't necessarily consider that toxic. I just consider that passionate.
You see, Vanessa Kirby was really buying into it, and we all know that this is marketing an actor's image, but people were buying into it, and Henry Cavill was starting to get a fan base, and people were saying stuff like, Henry Cavill should be the next James Bond, which he absolutely should have been, and it was a massive missed opportunity for him to not be. But anyway, that Henry Cavill was this guy who was very well liked by people, and he could have been that new heartthrob for movies if they had marketed him correctly. But what happened with Henry Cavill is he really got messed over by the industry because he asked for a lot, he stood up for fans, and he stood up for the lore, and he didn't get a lot of work. He's been labeled as difficult to work with, I think, because he stood up for himself, and so he hasn't gotten a lot of work. And I just think that's incredible because they probably should have looked at the fan base he was garnering and made considerations based on that. But they don't. They actively fight against what the audience wants. They say, oh, people like Henry Cavill, pay no attention to that. Throttle the guy. They want Pedro Pascal. That is who they want. So we see that the industry is really actively fighting against what the audience wants. If the audience decides that they like an actor, we don't get more of them. We get through who the designated selected actor that we're supposed to like is from Hollywood. But another example I want to use here is actually Sydney Sweeney. Now, that is a controversial one to bring up right now, or maybe not. I don't really care or pay attention to these manufactured controversies that much, but I do find something interesting about her because she has garnered a big fan base and following for her ads because she is the only actress out there, I think, let's just face it, she's appealing to the male gaze. And she's the only actress out there who really seems to be leaning into her appeal on that level. And that's made her much more famous for her advertisements. But I find it interesting that she seems to be becoming more famous for her advertisements than her actual work on movies. And the interesting thing is, well, she's marketed as very attractive, and that's the sole thing that she is selling these advertisements on. The choices that she's made to do in indie films and her actual film projects largely have her kind of dressed down and frumpy, and I find that very interesting. I think the exception was the movie Anyone But You that she produced, but I'm like, if you have this image that's selling for you and you're comfortable with selling yourself that way, why wouldn't you do more movies like that? Or why wouldn't you get more offers to do movies like that? Like, let's say, cast Sydney Sweeney as Samus Aran in Metroid or something like that. But there haven't been a lot of opportunities like that. I found it interesting that in the Madam Web movie, she looked perfect as Julia Carpenter Spider-Woman. And I'm like, we should have gotten a Sydney Sweeney, Julia Carpenter Spider-Woman movie. But instead, they made her the insecure girl in the background who was dressed frumpy. And I didn't really understand that. Now, maybe it's Sydney Sweeney's own decisions, but that would be really confusing as to why she's marketing herself a certain way when it comes to advertisements, because that sells, but why she either is choosing or getting a lot of these roles in movies that are the complete opposite of that. Now, once again, I'm not there behind the scenes. It could be her own decision making at this point, but I also do wonder, are Hollywood movies even in a place where they would market a person like that? I know that it was controversial because she showed cleavage in an advertisement. What next? She might show her ankle, but I just find it interesting because here you have a person who is really catching on, maybe in a similar way. I'm not saying that she is in any way on this level, but Marilyn Monroe picked up because she was very provocative and it was very different from what people were used to seeing. Even in that time, what Marilyn Monroe was doing was very provocative, but these days, it seems like executives in Hollywood don't really want to actually capitalize on that for whatever reason. But it is something that you have to consider. You have to be shrewd about it. Like, I'm no movie star on this channel, but at least I think, maybe put on a nice outfit, maybe put on makeup and stuff before you turn on the camera, because you have to look your best to sell videos, to sell movies, and all of that kind of stuff. And when it comes to movies, though, it's just like a lot of times I see people who are allowed to look really attractive on the red carpet, but then in the movies, they're really dressed down for some reason, even though that should be the main thing that they're trying to sell. Why do they sell the movies in these attractive costumes, but then in the movies themselves, they are dressed down? Another example of this would be Zendaya. Now, I've seen some people attack Zendaya over her looks, but Zendaya is a model and she looks great on the red carpets and everything like that. But I've just noticed that in the movies, like with the exception of a film like Challengers, in the movies, typically they also have her playing roles where she's wearing really baggy clothes and less makeup and just looks really unflattering, and I don't understand that. It's because you've got Zendaya, this model who is a model for a living, and why is it that in so many of her movies roles that you have her dressed down with the makeup look that's supposed to make it look like you are not wearing makeup? I don't really understand that. You've got her playing a riff off of Mary Jane Watson in the Spider-Man movies, but the direction you chose to take with her is to look really frumpy and depressed all the time, which is what a lot of her movie roles have amounted to, with the exception of challengers. I just find it very interesting why we're always trying to dress down attractive actors and actresses when we're watching movies. And once again, it offends people to talk about this kind of thing because we don't want to make judgments on how other people look or how that would reflect on us. But when you're selling a movie, you do have to make considerations on the aesthetics and what is going to sell the movie best. And that is not pressuring actors and actresses to the point where you're going to pressure them into surgery, but, making sure they're wearing the best clothes, making sure they have the best makeup job, making sure that they are presented in the best way possible and that they are the right casting for those roles. Instead, we want to uglify, I guess, the attractive actors and actresses that we do have and not capitalize on that image at all and make sure that we have taken away all of that appeal in the films, generally speaking. Make sure that there is no steaminess, generally speaking, in the romantic scenes and all of that, so that everything is bland and everything is devoid of any kind of sex appeal possible. And that isn't a wise way to sell movies. And maybe, there's a million problems with movies these days coming from America, but maybe that's part of the very long list of reasons why our movies just seem so much less appealing to people. But that is just something that I wanted to throw out there and talk about. And thank you for hearing me out on that. What do you think on this subject matter? Am I being too harsh on people? Am I being too hypocritical on people? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to become a patron or a membership, then you can check out the link in the description, and I will see you guys next time.